everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reluctant Hero Podcast. My name is Pauline Dugold. I am the main creative person here behind this podcast. I'm also a peak performance coach, and I have been creating this podcast specifically for the creatives out there. I am myself an artist, I'm a creative. And so I have been experiencing this process of creativity as a hero's journey. On the hero's path, we have stages, we have development, we go into the dark night of the soul, we experience darkness, we experience tremendous challenges. And in those moments, we need the most encouragement to continue and to go on. So this podcast has been serving this purpose of encouragement, inspiration, and letting other creatives know that they're not alone in their struggles. Struggles for creativities are endless. But we as creatives, we cannot stop ourselves. The innate desire to create something is inborn. We can try to not create, but eventually it comes out. So being an artist, I know that firsthand. And so I have conversations with other creatives who experience similar things. And we discuss their stories so that hopefully through these stories, you can have some inspiration and some encouragement for yourself. So today in this episode, I have Michael. He is a writer, he is an author, and he is the author of the Hype Handbook. He wrote a book a couple of years ago, and he is also the owner of the MicroFame Media. I will let him introduce himself more, but he's a very, very interesting individual, and he's got a lot of ideas and thoughts and stories about creative aspects of being a writer. So, Michael, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Pauline. It's so much fun to be here. We met quite a few years ago and had a great conversation and talked a bunch. And then the crazy pandemic, I think, got in the way, and we haven't talked for a long time. So it's so great to be here. But yeah, as you said, my name's Michael Schein, spelled in a weird way, Schein. So everyone says Sheen unless I'm in Germany or in a synagogue. Everyone says Sheen, but it's Schein. And yeah, I mean, again, I guess lately I'm best known for this book, the Hype Handbook, where McGraw-Hill put it out, and it's kind of the culmination of a lot of my life's work, at least for the last 12, 13 years, where I looked at all of these people who are the best at what you would call marketing, but who are not professional marketers and probably don't think of themselves as marketers. So rock and hip hop managers, really nasty people like cult leaders and propaganda artists. And I said, is there anything that these people have in common? Because I was noticing that a lot of the people, there's so many people who call themselves marketers now, because especially with the internet, and a lot of them, especially being in that field, I would hire outsourced marketers or even employees. And a lot of times they think of themselves as marketers because they're good at pushing the buttons on the right social media technology, but they don't actually do what you would think a marketer would do, which is to get attention and get people riled up and build movements. And I noticed that there were all these people throughout history who were really good at doing that, and they never would think of themselves as marketers. So I thought to myself, are there principles that these kinds of people use to get lots of attention and accomplish their goals? And can we apply them ethically if we don't come to them naturally? I had always been kind of a mischief maker in my own business. I did it to promote a writing business that turned into a marketing agency. And we've worked with some great clients, some names you've heard of. I put that together. I was like, here's my sort of like fun handbook that anyone can use. And it got some attention. Yeah, but there are plenty of stories. The Dark Night of the Soul thing is fascinating. I've never thought of it from that angle, and there's been plenty. So I can't wait to sort of put down my self-promotional guard for a minute and talk about the rough spots.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the how to utilize the marketing strategy ethically, because there's been so much of that lately. And that's actually how we met originally. I noticed your article about something related to those things, and then you had a subscription list, which I signed up for, and then we communicated through that. And there was just an evolution of
Yeah.
discovery, because I remember how you used to create reports by outlining the number of different books that you read and compiling a report of that,
I
which,
still do that. Yeah, we still do that. Yeah.
yeah, that's what interests me very much. And going back that 4 years ago, the world was completely different. So we met at the beginning of pandemic when the world was just starting to shift. And now 4 years later, we are in a completely different reality, it seems sometimes. And even time feels different at times, just like we were talking a minute ago. Everything has shifted. And so, before we get into the nitty gritty of the dark night of the soul and all of that, how did you actually get into writing? What was your beginning of your creative adventure?
I've wanted to be a writer since I was little. I mean, I am really bad at a lot of things, and I'm not saying that to be modest. I'm pretty sure I have this learning disability called dyspraxia that was never diagnosed, so I don't have a mental map. Like I'll get lost in my own neighborhood. It's a weird thing. I feel good because the guy from Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe, has the same thing. I don't know if I have it, but I have every one of the things. So like I'm bad at a lot of things. That being said, I'm very I guess I see the world through linguistic kind of frameworks. I talk to myself a lot. I think by talking, and I taught myself how to read. Like I don't remember a time where I couldn't read. My mom says that I was two. I think she might be exaggerating, but I definitely could read by the time I went to school. I was always writing stories. I was always reading from little. I had a little skinny books of Dracula and Frankenstein, like the kids' version, comic books, whatever. And so in first grade, I still remember this. I even talked about this in the Hype Handbook, without the detail. This woman, Mrs. Waters, a teacher, used to come to our class for like a special thing, like a special class that wasn't our main teacher. And it was first grade. So this was a cool thing. She was a creative writing teacher, and we would write stories. So I was about six. And my stories were always the favorite in the class. So I wrote this one about at the time, I mean, this was like probably like, I don't know, 1984 or something like that. I wrote a story called like WrestleMania 26, or I forget the number, which they're probably past that now, but they were on like two at the time. And I remember Mr. T came in on like a spaceship, and landed in the ring and whatever. And all the kids just loved it. And so, yeah, I love doing that. I got a lot of praise for doing that. And then when I was a little bit older, when everyone was convinced I could write fiction. I published a book, like a nonfiction book that was funny when I was in high school. It was a big publisher, but it didn't sell well at all, but whatever. Then I got really interested in music, but I was never someone to practice guitar. Even then, I was writing songs. So I always was into writing my whole life. Like I've always defined myself a little bit through that. So.
Wow, that is fascinating. What I find most fascinating is the fact that you don't have map of the physical environment, that doesn't register for you. So you map thing world through words, which is really interesting because maybe, and all of the creatives out there have a different perspective on the world. That is essentially what makes us creatives, the way to look at things that is different from everyday reality. And because we're all individuals, maybe the way we see reality is different anyway. But for you to recognize that you actually not registering kind of map and instead go straight into the words, which then create meanings, which then create maps. I was actually, I have been listening to the book Maps of Meaning recently by Jordan Peterson.
Oh, I've heard
And
of it. I know a lot about him, but I've never read his book. Yeah.
it is a fascinating book and it is available on podcasts now, so I can listen to it. And that is also related to listening to words, which then create meaning, which then allow us to create that map of reality, which we then perceive and understand. So it is very interesting how some of us, and it differs based on the senses. Some of us are more visual, others are more auditory, and then the language seems to be like a different type of sense at all. So it is, I like how you're describing your beginnings because, and me myself, being an artist, I started drawing and then I went into the painting, and that just kind of always been my thing. So for any creative out there, I'm sure they recognized some kind of thing that is theirs from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really love that you say that because I've never thought of it that way. I mean, the first thing I should say is I was never diagnosed with anything, but there were these it's like years and years and years ago, I met um in my early 20s, I went on a date, or like mid 20s, and this girl was, and I'll say girl because we were young, or was studying to be a psychologist. And I made a joke because I learned to do that. Like I got lost, as I always do when I was driving, and I said I have a learning disability, which I just was kidding. And she started like saying all these things like, did you have trouble doing basic tasks when you were a kid? And it turns out I did. I was really smart, I guess, in kindergarten, but there was this chart where you had to do all of these tasks or you couldn't graduate, and I couldn't zip my zipper on my coat. So my mom had to come in or I wasn't going to graduate kindergarten. And there's this thing called a nonverbal learning disability where the kids don't tend to get help for it because when you're linguistic in our society, you're considered smart, but it was my workaround for other things. So I've never been diagnosed, but one of those things where you hear it and you're kind of like, oh, because people get annoyed. You know what I mean? Like I've been in relationships where that cute little thing about getting lost all the time becomes extremely annoying to people, or the fact that I'm almost like physically dyslexic. Like I'll have an impulse to move the opposite direction, or like, get things mixed up when putting things together. But and again, I'm not particularly learning second languages. I mean, I'm particularly good at Spanish. I was fine. But I don't know. I really do process the word through words. So it's cool to hear you say that. I'd like to see if someone could I'd like to go through a battery of like experiments or something and see how that's shaped my talents or creativity or whatever.
Yeah, I always think that the types of intelligence depends on the person's personality, on their talents and their skills, on the inborn skills. So person can be intelligent in one way and completely inadequate in another
Yeah,
way.
100%. That's how I am. I say to people will say that I'm smart because I've done smart guy things, both in school and in my work. And I'll say to people, I'm like, I'm really, really smart at like three things, and I'm really dumb at other things. Like if we lived in a different kind of society, I would be considered an idiot. I mean, if it were 1500 or whatever, or in the jungle, I'd be like the moron who would get killed right away.
Yeah, and so that's interesting because we live right now in a world that allows for so much variety of
Right.
different talents. Before, when you're in a survival mode in a society that is not very well established, then the people who are not serving the survival means become either eliminated or outcast, and essentially that creates a lot of traumas for the generation to come. But whatever, that's a different conversation.
Although
And
I'd like to
another
think I'd be a priest or a shaman or like a storyteller. They slotted you into some like spiritual magician man role. So maybe I would have done that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring magician because magician is an archetype. It
hmm
is an archetype within four types of archetypes, which has nothing to do with survival and everything to do with magic. And the creatives most of the time fall into that archetype of the magician
Fascinating.
who goes into the unknown, into the realm of stories and brings something different for the world to look at. And the challenge with the magician archetype is nobody really understands what it is that they do, how they do it, and oftentimes they are ostracized and rejected because they're not seen as providers of security. And we value
Huh.
security so much in this world, even though
Interesting.
we have evolved and developed, still we place a lot of emphasis on that. And so the magician archetypes always get the short end of the stick, I find.
That's so fascinating. I have to dig into whatever you're digging into with this because that's really fascinating.
Yes, and so I can talk for hours about archetypal dynamics and how it shows up in creatives. But also, another thought that came to me when you're saying that you're not diagnosed. From what I've observed in the world around me, diagnosis is only serves us to prescribe something.
Uh,
Otherwise, every creative probably could get diagnosed on some
right.
level from
Right.
on some kind of a scale if they really were to go there because we're so different. The magician realm demands that difference of opinion, difference of perspective, and the unique way in which to operate. The normal person, well, normal, what is normal? There is no such thing. But the people who are more predisposed towards working in this three-dimensional reality have
Right.
difficulty going into that magical realm of the unknown and
Right.
bringing forth meaning and composing it out of words
There,
because
there's
that's
that.
storytelling. And that
there's
is
this
magic.
yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's this novel by the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. It's called Clans of the Alphane Moon, and it's about there's this spaceship or vessel, and it's transporting mental patients, and it crashes. And so years later, each of the different mental patient diagnoses have built a society. So the schizophrenics are this spiritual like wizard society. The paranoid people have like guns everywhere and they do the defense. It's this other group is the prophets, or no, they're the prophets, the schizophrenics, and then so it's like so what is a mental illness and what is a you know benefit, right?
That
Depends on the
is so
society.
fascinating because there's an
Yeah,
element of truth in it. Because all of, like, we have this capability for adaptation and normalization of whatever it is that we're dealing and going through. So if somebody had this condition and they figured out how to exist and how to function, then they could make a whole society of it. And one of the things that we have seen recently is emergence of cults, for example, and you reference it in your
yeah.
Hype Handbook, which is the heightened something. It is some kind of a thing. And all the coping mechanisms that we develop as humans in order to live and exist in our strange ways, especially if we don't know about something, it creates all those distortions. And that's what we see in the world. It's very interesting.
Exactly. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, so with all of that being said, how do you see yourself now having gone through all of that exploration, all of that maybe challenges? What is the overall macro picture that you see yourself in the context of the hero's journey path?
It's really interesting. And this is a fun podcast because I'm going to speak very differently than I do in most podcasts where I give my like description of what I do for a living and description of all the ideas in the book. But I sometimes wonder, a lot of times we talk about our lives as if they're stories, but I sometimes think that our lives are relatively random and we impose stories to make sense of them. And what I mean by that is, and which is good, but also bad, because sometimes I think you buy into the happy ending or the Hollywood ending or the sad ending or the myths, and it messes up the decision making process. So for example, I had a story arc in my mind at one point. I played in that band. I took it very seriously. It didn't work out. We had a big following, but we couldn't make money at it. I fell into the corporate world. I for 3 years it was good. After that, it was horrible. I felt a lot of pressure to stay because of money, and my boss was whatever manipulative, and not to put the fault on him, but I wasn't mature enough to not believe the ideas about that I would never make it on my own, and I was there way too long. I had to drum up a lot of courage. I had a baby. I decided I didn't want to live that way for my baby. I built up a following, a client base. I left. I almost went broke. I figured out how to market myself and I became successful and I had a marriage and a family, and that was the happy ending. And for a couple years, many years, I was really convinced I had reached my happy ending. Like my life was, I was successful. I was doing the thing I wanted to do. And as a result, I didn't really think about the next phase. I mean, of course, I worked hard. Of course, I innovated in my business, but I took for granted that that was the happy ending. And I was blindsided by the pandemic in a couple of ways. And I've never talked about this here, and I don't even know if I should. But one, this part I've talked about, all my clients froze their marketing budgets at the same time. I had an agency with a pretty standard, we did things very differently, but our structure was very standard. I had account managers and lots of overhead and this and that, which is great until it's not, because everyone froze their budgets at the same time. So I went from being on top of the world to being very scared that I was going to go bankrupt. I ended up saving it by changing things, but it was terrifying. And then at the same time, I've never talked about this, I got divorced and it blindsided me. It was not something I was expecting. It happened. I was really sad and miserable about that. I'm in a very good place now, by the way, and even better than before. But I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, I reached my happy ending. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't supposed to happen. Like, this is not I'm 40 whatever years old. I mean, the dark night of the soul, the belly of the beast, that's already happened. You know what I mean? Like this isn't supposed to be the thing. And I overcame it, and things are even better now than before. I changed my business model. We're doing better than ever, whatever, but it took a while. And I don't know, it made me think a lot because it's kind of like we use these hero journey kind of archetypes in our mind, but at the same time, while it gives some shape to our experience, you can buy into the myths and not look at the world the way it really is sometimes and get blindsided. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I hear you exactly and precisely what you're saying, that we presuppose that there's just one arc in our entire storyline, when
Right,
in fact there are multiples of arcs and circles and cycles that are consistently happening throughout our life. So
right,
we kind of been pre-programmed, I guess, to expect that there's going to be one theme, and instead, we
right.
have chapters in our lives
Yeah,
that
right,
consistently change. But one of the things that is worth to emphasize is that even though it's small chapters, like our life is composed of small chapters, each chapter makes us better. And even though comes point where we might dip into the darkness again, we will have more tools at the second chapter and the third and fourth and fifth than we were at the very beginning. And so each
that's true.
evolution of this spiral upwards lead us higher and higher and higher. So when people listen to that thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have more challenges and more
Right.
troubles, and I thought this was over. Well, yes, but you are getting better in with each experience, because we, like representation of the universe, are always expanding, and we expand through these micro arcs within our macro story of our life.
I love that. I really I feel like I'm not on a podcast, but I'm like doing one of your sessions. I'm getting some really good lessons here. I really like that idea of the like upward corkscrew. I mean, it's not, I guess, upward for everyone. I think you have to be conscious about it, right? Like you have to sort of bring yourself. Maybe that's a good organizing principle to make sure it's an upward arc.
You bring such a great point, because yes, you have to be conscious. And what happened to us 4 years ago? We all of a sudden been brought to this precipice of either becoming conscious and evolving, or going down really fast, really deep. And so some people became conscious and they took responsibility for themselves and changed certain things, and they pivoted and they going upwards. And there are other people who didn't. And you can see that. And downward spiral is always available. You can always go down, because the moment you start thinking negative thoughts, the spiral starts going down and there is no end in sight of that bottomless pit. But there is also option for upward spiral. And I just love talking about these concepts because it gives people a choice. Where are you going to go? You always have a choice of, because we are meaning making machines. And just like you explain how you bring meaning through words, we can bring meaning into our conversations, into our life, and change and shift things depending on how we look at things.
So I have a question. I love everything you're saying. I don't know. So can you remind me where you're from originally? Because you didn't grow up in the United States, right?
Well, actually, I live in Canada, but I'm originally from
Or are
Russia.
you live in Canada? I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. For some reason I forgot that. Yeah. But where are
Yeah.
you from originally?
So I was born in Russia.
Okay. So this is why I bring this up. That's what I thought. So people say that the culture has something to do with it. So Americans have traditionally been, on average, very optimistic because we're surrounded by two oceans. Even the wars that we have, while brutal, they're usually fought on foreign soil. Whereas what they say about Russians is there's a tragic sensibility, right? And it's what makes the literature so good. So, Russians have had a lot of trauma over their much longer history. So when you have this idea that it always goes up, but like, is that just because you live in North America now? Is that the more accurate way to look at things? Is the tragic sensibility more accurate? Because Americans are like, everything's gonna be just fine, and then like, you get kicked in the ass, right? So like, so I mean, as someone who's lived in both sides of the world, how do you look at that, and what brought you to I mean, you're a personal development coach, so obviously you came around to the North American view there. But it is interesting, right? We always talk in this way like it's an upward spiral, but I don't know. You guys have a lot of great novelists based on a very different point of view. So
Yeah, I love that question, and I never really considered that aspect. That for me, what I see Russia is having been very oppressed for a very long time.
yeah,
People have been, like in general, I have heard this idea that human life in Russia was not valued
right.
really on the fundamental level. You just look at the war and the dynamics of people who were just thrown into the front lines, and
Yeah,
there is
20
a
million people versus our like 700,000 people in World War II, right? And yeah,
constantly. First, there was
yeah,
oppression through the feudal system of the
right,
landowners who were owning peasants. Then there was revolution. Then there was oppression from the during the Soviet times. There's
right,
plenty of books written about that,
right.
all the regimes and how people were essentially just killing each other
Yeah,
because of the forced views that were forced upon them. The free speech was negligible, so
right,
people to express themselves in this creative way. And maybe that is how the energy turned out, because that was the only way to kind of express through fiction, through literature, through arts,
right,
because so much suffering, it has to go somewhere.
right.
I haven't really tried to delve, but there has been a lot of negativity, and I try not to go back into that because it's just, even though I was born in the 80s, in the time when things started to improve, in 91, the Soviet Union fell, and then I left the country.
But the
There's
90s were terrible, right? I mean, in the country, I mean,
the 80s still had a lot of deficit. And
right,
in the 91, after the fall of the Soviet Union, things started to improve. It
uh,
was obviously, of course, a slow process,
right,
but overall, the mentality has been that of scarcity
correct,
for
yeah,
a long time, and still is. There is a well, look at what is happening there now. It's very difficult to imagine what people are going through unless you
yeah, of
actually live there and
course,
have,
yeah,
and our adaptability and normalization of things has made it so that people with a certain traumas just became used to living
used
with
to
that.
it. Yeah, and I know that feeling. Have even on a like, I can't compare what I've ever gone through to that, but even when I worked at that corporate job and I just hated it and I would like dread every morning, you just get again nothing like being in oppressive government and this, but like you're just like, this is how I live. It sort of sucks, but you just sort of feel it buzzing in the background and you get through it. And I'm sure people
Yeah,
can adapt to anything.
exactly. And then they just carry it through without any tools of how to resolve it. Because it's very difficult to resolve things when you're in it, when you're
Right,
sitting in the middle of the darkness. Like
right,
you need some extraneous help in order to overcome that. So
right,
a lot of people just carry it through. And that is I mean, alcoholism is prominent and rampant in the country because people
right,
need to get away from their pain somehow. And that has been the coping mechanism for a long time,
right.
which has damaged a lot of people overall. And so moving then to the North America, when I moved, there became all of a sudden all these opportunities for exploration, development, learning, and whatnot. So I dove into, I always had the predisposition for learning and specifically learning spiritual aspects that
Oh
just
yeah.
interested me. The Eastern philosophies, the spiritual aspects are very prominent in Russian culture. Everybody kind of believes in mysticism. Some people are superstitious. Some people like to consider the paranormal aspects and consider the fact that the word shaman originates in Siberian culture. There
Is
is
that
the,
right? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
yeah, so there is a deep history of spirituality within Russia itself. So taking it out of there, it was kind of in my blood to be interested in mystical things and spiritual things and evolution. And then when I came to North America, I all of a sudden became exposed to all the literature that I could read and the people who were on this trajectory of self-exploration. So I had
Right.
multiple awakenings throughout the years where I learned more information and became more aware. And that led me to believe that I could evolve and grow and learn. So fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Fixed mindset,
Yeah.
you think everything is stable and you are who you are. And then the growth mindset, you thinking, well, you can evolve and change and improve. And so I decided I would really like to be on that path of evolution. And it's been literally 30 years of self-realization,
Yeah.
self-development, and understanding. And even until now, I'm still learning new things about myself. So how the trajectory, maybe it was predetermined that I was open-minded enough to
Right.
consider the ideas. And maybe so it was culture and nature and nurture, culture and the environment and the opportunities as well. And also, I always think how the more evolved the society is, the more you have ability to explore and learn. Because when all the survival things are taken care of and your needs are met, then you're able to create, then you're able to learn and integrate
Yeah.
things and heal and do all kinds of things, which North America provides. Even though some people might be a little bit ignorant of the darkness, some people might not know about Holocaust, they might question if was it even real or whatever. Even though there is still that, there is at least a space in which there is an opportunity for development present. And
At the
what?
same time, I agree with you. And at the same time, it's so nuanced because, like you said, sometimes pain, causes the best stuff. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking about Russian literature, but also the dominant musical art form of the last 30 years was invented in the South Bronx, which is the single poorest zip code in the United States. So like rap comes from the South Bronx, which in the 70s, it was like burnout buildings. And they basically took their parents' old records and stolen turntables because it was right after the riots where everyone stole turntables, and stereo systems and created this extremely rich art form, which, is winning Pulitzer Prizes now. So it didn't come from the richest zip code in the United States. It came from the poorest zip code because people they need an outlet, right? Like they'll always create no matter what.
Yes, and I've actually asked a number of artists about this concept that misery creates better art. Does it or does it not? This is still up for debate because
Or both,
limitation.
depends. Yeah.
Yes, in his book Creativity, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi
Yeah.
talks about how limitation does actually allow for more creativity to come in. It's almost like restricting the flow of the river and making the river flow faster because there is less space for it to flow through.
Yeah, I agree. It
So
is
there's something
interesting.
to
Yeah,
be.
if you have unlimited budget, I mean, just to extend the music example for a minute, this is such a goofy example, but that group, the rock band Guns N' Roses, their first album is like perfect. Like if you like rock music, it's just like the greatest, rawest album. And everything else kind of sucked. And then Axl Rose had an unlimited budget. And he took 10 years and he made this piece of garbage, Chinese Democracy, that like took a decade. And he was fixing every, note on the thing, and it's garbage. The other one was recorded in what, 6 weeks with like no budget, right? So,
Yeah, that is an excellent example because what else is present when you have unlimited budget? Your internal critic is present
right,
and your desire for perfectionism. And a lot of artists fall prey to that self-sabotage, inner critic. They can't focus well when there is no deadline looming
right,
above. So
right.
it's a very double-edged sword. You need some freedom, but then also you need restriction. I actually had a podcast episode with one of my friends who actually went to prison for a couple of years. And that created the perfect conditions for him
Yeah.
to learn to play guitar, to learn
Wow.
yoga, to start writing, to develop himself, because the limitation that was imposed upon him removed all kinds of distractions, which otherwise were not letting him even engage in creative pursuits.
That's what's so great about that creativity book by Michele, whatever. I don't know
Csikszentmihalyi.
how to pronounce his name. But yeah, I love how he doesn't give you any prescriptions. He's like, creative people are feminine and masculine. Creative people are strong and weak. He talks a lot about that weird space that creative people, they're promiscuous, but they're loyal. I mean, he talks a lot about how a lot of people fit in boxes and creative people tend not to, which is why we shouldn't criticize ourselves so much. Like a lot of times we look at our idols and we're like, well, that person made it at 22. Well, that person went to the gym every day at 5 in the morning. And it's like, well, there are drunks who became creatives. There are complete like type A personalities who created great art. It really, I should say alcoholics, not drunks. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, creatives are a living contradiction.
Right,
They exist in a space that is, so first of all, the contract, I call it the creative contract that we all agreed to embody when we come here as creatives. It puts us on the forefront of this unknown world. Like everything that we face in the physical reality is already known and already created. Like this pen, for example, it's already been created. There's nothing much you can do other than create something with it. But
right,
creatives are on this edge of the unknown where there is something exists that's never been seen before. They have to bring those ideas that are never been seen before, and they often reject it firsthand because nobody has seen them before. They
right.
are strange and they are threatening in their way. So oftentimes creatives get rejected for that. But also, the comparison is the death of creativity because it is connected so directly to the inner critic and the fear of rejection. And that is why creatives fear the feedback so much
Yeah,
because they don't have tools to kind of withstand that. When somebody criticizes their work, it's like they're being criticized at their very core.
I agree. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, and I think that's why creatives feel anxiety. I mean, as disheartening as it can be in a job you don't like and show up every day, there's also a certain sense of I know what I have to do every day, right? But if the job is you have to spend countless hours doing this thing that you may not get paid for. So it's hard work, but it might be completely rejected. You don't even really know if it's good. I mean, you have some sort of internal belief that it's good, but maybe you're insane, right? And maybe you're misreading what other people will like. And, it's just a very nerve-wracking experience to be creative. And actually, my girlfriend, a very excellent playwright and performer named Lauren O'Brien, who actually her show just got extended to off Broadway. At a certain point in the process, she said to me, she's like, "Why do I do this to myself?" You know what I mean? Like, why do I put myself? But it's a compulsion. When you have a compulsion to create, you can sometimes say, I'm not going to. I'm T.S. Eliot. I'm going to be a banker, but it always comes out, right? Like it always leaks out of you in some form. You can't help it if you're wired that
Exactly.
way.
That's what I said at the beginning. We don't have choice. We have to create one way or another. And I love what Rick Rubin said recently on the podcast. He was talking to Andrew Huberman, and the question arose as
Yeah.
to how do we know what is the right way to create or what we are, if anything that we are creative is valuable. And he said that thought should not even come into the process.
Right,
Whether
right.
you creating something valuable or not is completely irrelevant because you have to be in a process of just bringing it in without any attachment of how it's going to turn out.
I love Rick Rubin. I think he's absolutely right. The one thing that I always think to myself, though, when he says that kind of stuff in his Zen-like voice, which I do agree with, is that, yeah, that's easy to say when you produced License to Ill at the age of 20, which sold 40 million records. And then your next album was Run DMC, which sold another 28 million records or whatever the order was. Like the guy says you got to be agnostic about what you create. And I think he really did create that way. But it's so easy to say when you have a natural sense of like his taste just happens to line up with what the market wants. Just like Stephen King. I love Stephen King. I think he writes that stuff because he truly loves that material. I don't think he's a hack, but he's so lucky because his taste lines up with the public taste. Whereas Franz Kafka, who now is considered a genius, his taste lined up with nobody's taste. So it's like easy to say when you aren't living like a dog as a result of your inability to like think about the market, you know?
Exactly. That is the biggest issue, the biggest challenge, the biggest dark night of the soul, the biggest opponent in the lives of any creative. The starving artist stereotype, the fact that it is so excruciatingly difficult to bring something and make it worthwhile and actually be recognized for it. And the fact that you can't stop doing that, that is sometimes it could be like, yeah, exactly like your girlfriend said, why do I put myself through that? Why do I insist on continuing staying on that path when
And she
every
happens to, at this, finally, she's actually getting a lot of momentum. It just went off Broadway. She's got producers, but she had to really stick to it for years and years and years. But she did, you know?
overnight success that takes 10 years? That's in
Yeah,
any creative
right.
industry. And so the grit that is required for that to happen is unlike anything else. We sometimes think that doing physically difficult things is hard. Like you're lifting hard things, you're carrying something heavy, regardless. But staying on this journey with no understanding on constantly dealing with the unknown, with no predictability, with no stability, this journey is like unlike anything else out there.
I mean, very emotionally hard, you know. It's funny. I'm actually doing something I've never done before. I'm doing a panel and a course for one person show creatives because that's something that actually has caught a lot of traction lately because of the success of shows like Baby Reindeer and things like that. And I always worked in my agency. We would work with like big executive consultants and, you know, insurance professionals who really need to generate a personal brand, and tech companies. One, because they're good companies to work with, but two, because they have budgets, you know, for marketing. And what I realized was there are all these people out there who are creating great work. And if you follow the Rick Rubin thing, that's great for its own sake, but they want to do this for a living. They're dying to do this for a living. They're waiting tables, you know, and they invest in themselves. So they're not going to invest whatever, $7,000, $10,000 a month or whatever, but they're starting to say, look, like no one is responsible for my success but me. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be discovered, especially I'm doing this weird thing, a one person show. So we're doing this thing where they're coming to people like me to say, teach me how to, once I have the thing built, how do I attract attention? And you don't have to attract attention from the world. I mean, if you attract attention from that's the great thing about the internet. If a lot of things are bad with it, but when you were Franz Kafka, if you didn't get your book published with one of the 10 publishers in Germany, no one was reading it. But now there's probably some weird sub niche of 1.5 million people who like obscure books about people turning into insects. You know what I mean? And it's not going to be 300 million people. It could be 100,000 people. But if each of them are paying you $10 for each of your stories, that's a big deal. And so there are ways now to maybe get around the starving artist thing that didn't exist in the
Yeah,
past, which is encouraging.
that is very fascinating and also very interesting to note that obviously we as creatives want to monetize our work. We want to exist. We want to be somewhat stable and continue creating. And so I've been referencing a lot of Eastern philosophy about that, how the Eastern philosophy talks about three centers in the body: the mind, the heart, and the body itself, kind of the three aspects. So I started recognizing how for creatives, it's imperative to align all three centers. The mind creates ideas or channels them and brings them forward. The heart provides the passion, but then the body actually executes
Right.
those
That's
ideas.
a great framework for that.
Yeah, and those three things have to be balanced because what happens when you are only have two of the things? If you only have ideas and passion, then you just have empty dreams. If you have intellect, like if you have your mind and you have your body, then you have execution, but it becomes taking advantage of your own ideas. You're just selling your art for the sake of selling it without soul in it. Or if you only have the passion and expression, then you are in the land of illusion because all you are doing is just living in this perpetual thinking that you're doing something worthy, but it's not really proper
Yeah,
ideas.
right. That's such a great framework. I've never heard that. That's so interesting.
Yes, I kind of developed it in my mind as I have been analyzing and looking and talking to people and realized those three things have to be present. And so, how does it relate to a real lifetime situation? It means that your body has to be in top shape. It means you have to have the best health that you can arrange for yourself in order to execute those ideas that come properly. In order to get the ideas coming properly, you have to have the proper relationship with your mind, your ego, your understanding. How do your ideas actually come to you? Do they come in song form, in the words form? Do you see
Right.
them visually? And then the most critical element is the passion. Like, is this something that drives you and makes you wake up in the morning? It's like a driving engine of the car. And how do you cultivate the passion within yourself to continue having those things aligned?
Let me ask you a question about that. So, do you know who Scott Galloway is?
Sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I'm
He made
placing
his
it.
money in something, I don't know what, and now he's sort of this guru, and he's all over the place, and he's smart in a lot of ways. I mean, he's even been on Bill Maher. The one thing I don't like about him, he's one of these guys who's an expert on everything. I mean, he's talking about politics today. He talks about the crisis in men. I mean, he's everything. So one of the things he's going around saying, and I think there's some truth to it, but I don't know. He says all of these millionaires and billionaires who do talks about follow your passion, which always is in entertainment. You know what I mean? People are like, I got to follow my dream. People think it's never like my dream is, I don't know, marine biology. Some people, but it's rare. It's always I want to be a pop star. But he's saying all these people who say follow your dream made their, as he says it, made their money in iron ore smelting. You know what I mean? He says most people should not follow their passion. He's like, become a tax accountant, become good at it, and you'll become passionate about it. And on one hand, I think he's absolutely right. I can't tell you how many people, and I was one of them, but people who stick with it a lot longer than me, who are just like, I need to follow my dream of being a screenwriter, and they're not going to become a screenwriter. Like it's just not going to happen. And if whereas on the other hand, I tried it the other way, and I worked really, really, really hard at my corporate job, and I couldn't engage my heart, like no matter what. And it made me on the good side of mediocre. And I just wonder, how do you balance that? Like, of course, it's more fun to work in the movies than to work in, I don't know, supply chain. So of course, I mean, my passion is movies. I love movies. I mean, who doesn't like movies? So how do you sort between follow your dreams when I want to be the next Taylor Swift? Well, you're not gonna be the next, like, maybe, but have you been hearing how good a singer you were since you were one? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? It's on one hand I hear him and I agree, and on the other hand I'm like, oh, you're a dream killer, like it's horrible.
Oh, this is such a good question, and everybody has question about that. I'm sure that it is so relevant. And what comes to mind is some kind of quote. I think I heard it somewhere that you have to walk with a dream, but have your feet planted firmly on the ground,
Right,
which relates back to that Japanese concept of ikigai. Like, you got to have the passion, but you have to understand also what does the world needs and wants. So
right,
there is constant this collaboration, and that, I think, it relates to having the proper grasp of the mind. Because the mind, if it's not grasped, it can go away, it can run away with dreams and ideas and just like a wild
right,
horse, just run off into the sunset, and you won't have it tied to the reality, to the groundedness of this. What is currently needed in the world? What is wanted?
right,
And what, so it's a combination of what do you like to do, but also what does the world need? So there is like a teeter-totter. What do people want to learn about, hear about, solve the problems for, and what are you good at? So that's a combination, and it takes lifetime to really properly identify that. But it starts. So this it starts with that skill or talent that comes in childhood. For you, it was writing, for example. So there is writing. And so you can write different things. You can write fiction
Right.
stories, you can write children's stories, or you can write manuals. It's all
Well, I became a
writing.
copywriter and I did very well with that. And that turned into marketing because at which I made my, you know, living at,
Right.
I mean, and still do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it stems from that seed of awareness that something is your thing. Like for me, it's art, and I haven't quite figured out what art I want to paint
Right.
that can be combined with what people out there want. So for me, it's just like sitting in the back burner. And for me, my art right now is my speaking and my thoughts and my ideas. But for like, let's say music, somebody has the skill and talent for music. What kind of music can they create that they can enjoy, but also something that people may like? Well, maybe classical composing is what they really like, but maybe music for movies is something that's more practical,
Well,
something like
I mean, the best singer in my high school, this guy, Greg Slewitt, a really good guy, but he's a really successful entertainment attorney now. So like he knew he was going to be involved in music. He was the best singer in my school, but was he the best singer in the world? You know, it's funny. I mean, there are a lot of good singers, right? I mean, a good percentage of the people sing to their babies. It's not that rare, right? But he's really successful. The way I sometimes talk about it, you can tell me if you think this is useful. When people ask me advice, younger people who are just starting out, I say you really got to look for the side doors. Like if you're banging your head against a locked front door for a long time and you're not getting anywhere, it's really important to find those side doors. So a lot of people, they'll find a locked front door and they'll just keep banging their head against it. So they're like, I don't know, I need to become a screenwriter. I must become a screenwriter. I must become a ceramics, artist. And they're not getting the proper response. Every time they write a screenplay or every time they do a ceramics, it's pretty good, pretty good. And you do that 10 times and we get all these messages. And maybe this is the downside of storytelling. Follow your dreams. J.K. Rowling got rejected 35 times, et cetera, et cetera. And we hate to think we're the one person that maybe ceramics or screenplays aren't our thing. But instead, if you say, look, I'm really into movies, I'm really into art, is there a side door that'll get me somewhere, that'll get me in the building? Is there a window? Maybe it's you start a ceramics Etsy and then see if there's traction there. And then from there, you expand it to an in-person store. I don't know, like you get a job at Sotheby's, whatever that thing is. But I think we're fed this stuff about follow your dreams in a very, very follow your passions in a very narrow way. And if you compared the number of people trying to be pop stars or screenwriters or whatever it is with the number of slots available, the math doesn't work.
Oh, I love that. It's absolutely exactly that. Not only that, creatives have to set themselves right from the beginning. You're going to have to pivot a lot. But not only that, you have to always look for what's underlying reason that you want to do ceramics or play music or write, because underlying reasons are usually needs that have not been met in some other form, and they're persistent needs that we can't get away from.
That,
And that is the way that the person has decided they're going to meet them. For example, if they need significance, that's one of their needs, they're going to want to be a pop star or some kind of a famous person to get that significance, that importance need filled up. So there's that. Always have to be aware what needs are you trying to fulfill with those actions and those activities. And the second thing, what are the underlying traumas that you're trying to overcome or sidestep or create compensatory strategy through your creative work? Because everybody has some kind of traumas. It doesn't have to be big. In the book, The Myth of Normal, the Gabor Mate talks about how even the smallest thing, like the child not getting a toy at the store, could result in a trauma. So everybody has something within them that is like a thorn sticking in
everyone
their
has a
side.
thorn, right? That's what they call it in storytelling. I mean, trauma, that word, people use it. It's like cheapen the word. Like we're putting like people who didn't get a toy on the same thing with someone whose leg was blown off up in a bomb, but like everyone's got wounds, everyone's got hurts, everyone's got, and then there are certain people who can get their leg blown up in a bomb and they're like, oh, shit happens. And other people, their mom yelled at them and it breaks them.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody has something that they're trying to overcome, trying to solve, trying to compensate for. So you just have to be aware. And as a creative, it is your job and duty to be aware of yourself on that journey, that hero's path journey. So that you're not just blindly following your passion or dreams and living in illusions and then getting disappointed and going into the downward spiral, but instead learn about yourself through those challenges and those things that are showing up. So when the front door, like I like this metaphor, if the door closes, buy the whole building.
Yeah, you're really making me think. I mean, just to do some self-exploration, I always wanted to write fiction. And then in for a couple of years, I was always really into music. I mean, I've used examples, but I was obsessed with the idea that I was going to change rock and roll. Now, I don't like practicing guitar, and most of the bands I was in weren't that good, but I just had this weird confidence of youth that I was going to write these songs that would attract people to me. And that kind of happened. I mean, the music was 1999 when I started it. The music was so bad. I was like, we got to get back to the cultural impact of Bowie and this and this. And it didn't work out, but we did make a great band. But the reason I bring this example up is when that thing didn't work out, I immediately lost interest. I have no desire to play in a band anymore. And I'm thinking right now about what was that about? And I think what it might have been about for me, it's probably about a lot of things, but on just like a level down, at that time, the best way to influence the culture, especially youth culture, was music. I remember like now everywhere I go, people have bumper stickers that are either make America great again, free Palestine, live, laugh, love. It's always some political thing. It used to be Dead Kennedys, Nirvana, the Grateful Dead. It was like your tribe was your music. Now your tribe is like your politics. Music's almost like wallpaper, right? And so I think, and the fact is, it tells you something that I never practiced guitar. I was a very undiligent guitar, but I have written something almost every day of my life, and that includes songs. So I'm like, it was the need to play music or was the need to shift the culture? Was the need to feel like I'm shifting the culture? Was the need to, so even the stuff I write about, it's all about cultural movements. And I don't know, I'm not there yet, but I think there's something to that. What was that thing that made me so obsessed? Someone who's not really a guitar player, who's a very mediocre guitar player and never worked hard to become better. Why did I risk everything to do this thing and make a pretty good run at it? That's interesting. It wasn't about the music, obviously.
That is incredible insight. And for anybody who is listening, when you find yourself in the darkest spot, when you don't know what you're doing, why you're doing, when everything seems to be breaking down, start digging. Because that's where the gold is. That's where the insights are in that dark, bottomless pit that is so desperate and so hopeless. That is where the information is. That is where insights are. That is where the gold is. So start digging. And so we have covered so much. I hope the listeners got really a lot out of this episode because we went through all the ways in which the creatives experience this challenges on their journey of life. And it's just so beautiful to have a conversation like that it feels expansive. It's like expanding awareness and expanding the view and the perspective on the world and the world of creativity. So in closing, is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say, the final message to creatives out there?
Well, first of all, I want to say I feel like we could do a mini series. I mean, I think that's a testament to you as an interviewer, but I loved every minute of this. This was a really fun conversation. Just know that it's a tough life to choose to do your own thing. It's fulfilling. I mean, you know, even now when I have a good career. I mean, I do. I make a nice living doing what I do. I have a certain name, but at least once every 2 years, I think about getting a job. I have a flip out and I'm like, I don't know, I have a bunch of clients who are paying well and then two wrap up at the same time, and I don't know how I'm going to replace them. Have this other idea. I'm getting a little bored of my standard work because I'm that kind of person and I have it down to a science and I have this amazing idea and I can't free up the time for it. And I think, well, if I just had a 9 to 5, which is completely untrue, people own your time, but I have this delusion that if I just have a 9 to 5, I could do my thing and have the security. And so just even the fact that I've made, I guess, a career as a self-employed creative, and I think business and marketing is a type of creativity. My company creates products, teaching what we do. I write books, but at least once every 2 years, I'm like, I gotta get a job. This is a nightmare. I can't deal with this uncertain. And so I don't know. It never ends. And I mean, on one hand, that's depressing, and on the other hand, just know that you're not alone. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I experienced the same. I think every creative out there, when faced with too much uncertainty, starts getting anxious, and anxiety is something that you have to deal with in your own nervous system because uncertainty is never going to go away as long as you're being creative. So
And
that's
it's also
perfect.
unrealistic. That's the thing. I mean, I haven't feared going broke since the third year of my business. I feared it a lot. I've never been in real danger of going broke since like the third year of my business. But emotionally, it wells up in a spasm of like,
Yeah,
fear every so
absolutely.
often. Yeah.
And so self-care strategies are essential for creatives. It can't just be dismissed. It needs to be a ritual of something that you do to care for yourself as a creative on this very rocky and unknown journey of unprecedented things. So that is a very beautiful message. So hopefully people get reassured a little bit that it's worth doing what they're doing, that it is not going to be easy, but it's going to be rewarding. And the universe supports those who are on the evolutionary path of self-awareness and exploration. And so, where can people find more about you?
And my company is microfamemedia.com. That MICROFAME media.com. We didn't talk quite as much about what we do, but if you realize that your success, that the maybe level of your concrete success, turning your ideas into money, is dependent on being known as the expert in your niche, we're very, very good at making that happen. So if you look up MicroFame, that concept online, we tend to come up near the top. So we didn't talk as much about that, but if that seems like something interesting to you, you can check us out there.
Amazing. I will add the description and the links below the episode so you can find it. And we probably should have more of these discussions where we can go further in depth about your book, further in depth about your microfame media. There's so much more to discuss. So thank you very much for this episode, for this conversation. I always enjoy having these interesting conversations with different artists and creators. It has been really amazing. So thank you everybody for listening and for watching this episode, and stay tuned for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about me, you can go to artdiversion.com. I have a book there that is free to download. It's called Maps of Creative Blocks. If you feel creatively blocked in some way, you could benefit from that. And that is it for today, and we will see you next time. Thank you.